Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for Hexham for bringing this important matter to the floor. As has been clear from the contributions from Northern Ireland, sheep farming is a significant, but sadly the poor relation of farming, because in the farming sector, the lowest farm incomes arise from sheep farmers. And that is an indication in itself of an indisputable fact that what is needed in Northern Ireland, and particularly for a constituency like mine, North Antrim, which has a lot of sheep farmers, what is needed is a sheep support scheme. Now, in Northern Ireland, we do have a beef support scheme. It's called the Beef Carbon Reduction Scheme. We have a suckler cow scheme, and all those contribute to environmental enhancements on what used to be the single farm payment, now the direct payment. But there is no scheme for sheep farmers. And that is a lamentable failure of the local department. They've been sitting on a task force recommendation since early last year and have failed to move on that matter. And not only is it failure to move, not doing anything to increase, but it's going to bring about a decrease in income, because from 2025, sheep farmers who are sheep farming only are set to lose 17% of the basic payment scheme, unless they change to include protein crops and cattle. And for many of them, that's not just possible. So there's an urgent need for action.
Member give way.
Yes?
I'm sure the member is also aware when he talks about our sheep farmers in Northern Ireland looking enviously on at the beef farmers, all the rest of it in Northern Ireland. They also get to look across the border where the Republic of Ireland government has actually introduced a sheep support scheme which is paying up to 17 to 20 euros per head, which is actually putting our farmers in Northern Ireland at a further disadvantage.
Well, I'm grateful, but it's actually worse than that, because yes, we can look across the border and see the advantage, but the problem for Northern Ireland farmers is, courtesy of the Windsor Framework and Protocol, that we are subject to the same rules and regulations, but none of the benefits under the protocol. Because, never forget this, farming in Northern Ireland, the laws are not made in this place. They're not made in Stormont. They're made in a foreign parliament to which we elect no one. And that is the ultimate constitutional absurdity of the Windsor Framework, that we've created a situation where over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland, the laws are foreign imposed, colony-like on Northern Ireland. And the whole agri-food industry, those laws are made in Brussels. And that is an appalling constitutional and economic affront. And because we are subject to the European veterinary regime, we now have this looming crisis that come 2025, our veterinary medicines, which are produced in Great Britain, will not be permitted to enter Northern Ireland, and up to 50% of our medicines are going to be excluded from Northern Ireland. That is a serious challenge, which the last government did nothing about, and which this government, I trust, will do something about. And it's going to take this government to stand up with vigour against the European Commission and to insist that any part of this country must be entitled to have the same veterinary medicines as the rest of this country. And it's time that we shook off those shackles and insisted on that. And of course it gets even worse, because it's already been alluded to. We now have a situation where to move livestock from Great Britain to Northern Ireland is subject to every EU rule that applies. And therefore we have quarantine periods of 6 months if you're wanting to bring in some livestock, of 30 days on the host farm from which they're coming. Why? Because that's what EU rules, to which we have been left serf-like, subject to, insist upon. And take something like sheep farming. You need constantly to be improving the genetic line. You need to bring in new rams. But to bring in a new ram from Scotland or Wales, which would be our traditional sourcing, is now impossible because of these quarantine rules. And that needs to be addressed. And we also have other dimensions in reference to the fact that there are stranded on this side of the Irish Sea hundreds of cattle and livestock since last year because they cannot be moved to Northern Ireland because of EU rules about blue tongue. And yet we have the ludicrous situation that if you buy a ram in France, or if you buy cattle in Sweden or anywhere else, you can bring them through GB straight to Northern Ireland, but if you buy them in GB, you cannot bring them to Northern Ireland because GB is said to be a blue tongue zone. Even though you're buying them from Scotland in many cases, which has no blue tongue difficulties, you still can't bring them. Why? Because, again, of the absurdity that we are subject to EU rules. And this House, far outside the framework of farming issues, needs to get hold of the fact that unless and until we deal with the constitutional imperative of restoring Northern Ireland to the rules of this House and of this country, not of a foreign jurisdiction, then we're going to have these multiple problems. And they but manifest themselves in the way I've described in our farming industry. So it's a multifaceted problem, but a multifaceted problem with very deep issues that need to be addressed. The last government had no appetite to address them. In fact, they deepened the problems with their Windsor framework. I trust this government, who has inherited this ludicrous situation of Northern Ireland being a condominium ruled in part by laws made in the United Kingdom and ruled in part by foreign laws in a foreign jurisdiction, that this government will address that issue, because we cannot go on like this. Neither our sheep farmers, nor any other farmers, nor our citizens, living in a situation, colony-like, where we're ruled by laws we don't make and can't change. Thank you.
Well done.